My name is Elena Voss. And 2 years after the crash that stole the use of my legs, my own family still believed I was the problem. Not the drunk driver who hit me from behind. Not the people who covered it up. Me. It all exploded at my sister Claire's wedding rehearsal dinner. The vineyard terrace was glowing under strings of warm fairy lights. 80 guests laughed and clinked champagne glasses, while the smell of fresh bread and rosemary filled the air. Claire stood in her soft ivory dress, looking like the picture-perfect bride. She raised her glass and gave that sweet, practiced smile she'd perfected since we were kids. "To family," she said, "the people who know us best and love us anyway." Then her eyes landed on me, sitting at the end of the long table in my wheelchair. Especially my big sister Elena, who's been through so much. Even if some of it is, in her head. A few awkward chuckles rippled through the crowd. My mother touched her pearls. My father stared into his drink like I had already ruined the evening. Before I could respond, Marcus, my soon-to-be brother-in-law, walked behind me. Without a word, he grabbed the handles of my wheelchair and yanked it forward sharply, trying to move me out of the way, like I was an inconvenient piece of furniture blocking the view. The chair tipped. I hit the stone floor hard, my shoulder and hip taking the impact. Gasps shot through the terrace. Someone dropped a glass. Claire put her hand over her mouth in fake shock. My father just shook his head slowly, as if I had chosen this exact moment to embarrass them. I lay there for a second, cheek against the cold stone, feeling the eyes of 80 people on me. Pain radiated up my spine. But, more than the physical hurt, something else settled in my chest. A cold, quiet clarity. This was the moment I had been waiting for. If you've ever been humiliated by the people who were supposed to protect you, if you've ever been called a liar in your own story, type the word silent in the comments right now. I want you to know you're not alone. Because what none of them knew. Not my sister in her perfect dress. Not my father with his powerful handshake. Not my mother with her careful silence. Was that for 2 long years, I had been collecting something far more dangerous than their pity. I had been collecting the truth. And that night, the truth was finally ready to walk through the door. I live in a small 1-story apartment now, about 20 minutes from the big family house on the hill. Everything in my home is arranged so I can reach it from my chair. The kitchen counters are lower. The cabinets have pull-out shelves. My desk sits right by the big window, where the afternoon light pours in while I work. I'm a freelance graphic designer and bookkeeper. Most days, I spend my time creating brand identities for small businesses and balancing spreadsheets for clients who have no idea what I've been through. People see the wheelchair and often speak to me in that soft, careful voice, like I'm made of glass. I stopped correcting them a long time ago. It takes too much energy I'd rather spend on living. My family never used that soft voice. They used distance. They used doubt. They used silence. After I got out of the hospital, they told everyone it was just a bad accident. A single car crash on Highway 19. They said I must have been tired or distracted. My father, Raymond Voss, made sure the official reports stayed clean. He's the owner of Voss Construction, a man who built an empire from one bulldozer and sheer force of will. In his world, image is everything. And a daughter in a wheelchair who kept talking about a mysterious black SUV was bad for business. My mother, Diane, would visit once every few weeks with casseroles and carefully chosen words. "We just want you to focus on healing, sweetheart. Let's not drag up the past." Claire, my younger sister, was always too busy planning her dream wedding to sit with me for long. She'd smile brightly and say things like, "You're so strong, Elena. I don't know how you do it," while her eyes flicked away from my wheels. They never wanted to hear about the headlights I still saw in my nightmares. They didn't want to know how my body went from running marathons to needing help just to get dressed some mornings. They wanted the version of me that didn't complicate their perfect picture. So I learned to smile and nod. I learned to say, "I'm fine," even when my back burned and my legs felt like dead weight. I attended family dinners from the end of the table, watching them laugh and plan Claire's future while I quietly took notes on my phone. Because by then, I had already started my own quiet project. Every night after the apartment grew dark, I would sit at my desk with my palms resting on the cool metal of my wheelchair. I'd close my eyes and remember the impact. The way my car was slammed forward, the screech of metal, the terrifying silence that followed. I wasn't imagining it. I knew what I saw. And I was done waiting for them to believe me. I started making phone calls. I filed requests for every record connected to that night. I spoke with the paramedics who pulled me from the wreckage. I tracked down the tow truck driver. Slowly, carefully, like putting together the world's most painful puzzle, I began collecting proof. My family thought I had accepted their story. They thought I had given up. They had no idea I was just getting started. If you've ever had to pretend everything was okay while secretly planning your escape from the lies around you, you understand how heavy that kind of patience can feel. But sometimes patience isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the sharpest weapon you have. Let me take you back to that October night, 2 years ago. I had just finished helping my father's company with their year-end financials. It was late, almost 11 p.m., and I was exhausted but satisfied. The roads were wet from an earlier rain, but I knew the route home by heart. Highway 19 stretched dark and quiet ahead of me. Then it happened. A sudden, violent jolt from behind. The sound of crunching metal. My car lurched forward violently. I remember gripping the wheel, trying to regain control as everything spun. Headlights, bright and high, filled my rearview mirror for a split second before the world turned upside down. I don't remember the full crash. Just fragments. The airbag exploding against my face. The taste of blood. The strange, terrifying silence after the screeching stopped. I woke up 9 days later in the ICU with a fractured spine at TOT-10. The doctors were honest but gentle. "You'll likely need a wheelchair for the long term. We'll do everything we can. When I was finally able to speak clearly, I told them about the black SUV. I described the partial license plate I had glimpsed. I begged them to check for evidence of another vehicle. My father was already there, talking quietly with the responding officer, an old golf buddy. By the time I could form complete sentences, the official report had been written. Single vehicle accident. Driver fatigue suspected. Case closed. My mother sat beside my bed, holding my hand too tightly. Honey, you hit your head really hard. The mind can play tricks after trauma. Claire stood in the doorway, scrolling through her phone, avoiding my eyes. Marcus, who had only been dating my sister a few months at the time, hovered awkwardly, saying nothing. I tried again and again in the weeks that followed. Every time I mentioned the other car, the conversation would shift. Let's focus on your recovery. The company is under a lot of pressure right now. You don't want to cause more problems, do you? Eventually, the gaslighting became crueler. At one family dinner, I overheard my father telling my uncle, "She's always been dramatic. Now she's using this for attention." My mother didn't defend me. Claire just changed the subject to her upcoming engagement photos. That was the moment something inside me shifted. I stopped arguing. I stopped trying to convince them. Instead, I started listening. I started watching. And most importantly, I started documenting everything. From my hospital bed, I requested my complete medical file. Once I got home, I filed for the full police incident report, not the summary page. I contacted the insurance company and demanded every photograph and statement related to the crash. The more they told me to let it go, the more determined I became to hold on. I still remember sitting in my new apartment that first month, staring at the boxes I couldn't unpack myself, feeling the full weight of what had been taken from me. My independence, my future plans, my family's love, or at least the illusion of it. But in that pain, a new version of me was born. A quieter, smarter, more patient version. A version that would wait. A version that would win. If you've ever been told your pain isn't real by the very people who caused it, I want you to know this. Your memory is valid. Your truth matters. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop explaining yourself and start building your case in silence. That night, in my apartment, with the city lights flickering through the window, I made a promise to myself. I would never again beg my family to believe me. Instead, I would make the truth impossible to deny. It wasn't about revenge at first. It was about survival. About reclaiming the story of my own body. About refusing to let them turn my injury into a family inconvenience. So I became strategic. Every Sunday dinner, I smiled. I asked Claire about her wedding plans. I listened to my father talk about the big commercial project that could take Voss construction to the next level. I let my mother fuss over me, while quietly noting every contradiction in their stories. At the same time, behind the scenes, I worked. I spent hours on the phone with insurance adjusters. I learned how to file formal requests for documents. I researched every law, related to hit-and-run cases and evidence preservation. My background as a bookkeeper gave me an advantage. I knew how money left trails, and I knew how companies tried to hide them. I found the first real crack when I received the complete EMS report. The paramedics had written clear notes: significant paint transfer on rear bumper, inconsistent with single vehicle rollover. Possible second vehicle involved. Recommend further investigation. That document had never made it into the official police summary. My father's friend signed. That was the moment my quiet anger turned into cold determination. I reached out to the tow truck driver, who had taken my wrecked car to the impound lot. He remembered the case. He told me the damage didn't look right for what they were claiming. I paid to keep the car in storage instead of letting it be scrapped, just in case. Then I found Mrs. Delgado. She was 78 years old, sharp-minded, and walked her little terrier along Highway 19 every evening. On the night of my crash, she had seen everything. The black SUV speeding up behind me. The impact, the driver never even braking. She wrote down part of the plate and called 911 immediately. When the police never followed up with her, she assumed the case was handled. Until I called her. We met at a quiet coffee shop. She took my hands in hers and said, "I've been praying someone would believe me, dear." For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel crazy. I felt seen. From that day forward, my life had two realities. On the surface, I was the brave but difficult daughter who had emotional problems after her accident. The one who needed to stop living in the past. Underneath, I was building a case so strong that when the moment came, they wouldn't be able to look away. I hired Thomas Reed, a calm, methodical lawyer who specialized in personal injury and cover-ups. He didn't promise miracles. He simply said, "We gather the evidence until it speaks louder than their lies." And that's exactly what I did. I stopped expecting my family to love me enough to tell the truth. I started loving myself enough to demand it. The next 14 months became a masterclass in patience. While my sister planned color schemes and floral arrangements, I was filing subpoenas and chasing paper trails. Every small victory felt like a quiet rebellion. I got the full forensic photos from the crash scene. The paint transfer on my rear bumper was unmistakable. A deep black, with a specific metallic flake that matched high-end SUVs. I paid a private investigator to run the partial plate. Mrs. Delgado remembered. It led us to a black Cadillac Escalade, registered to Marcus Hale, my sister's fiancé. The pieces were falling into place. But I needed more. Through my lawyer, we discovered that Marcus had taken the SUV to one of my father's trusted body shops the very next morning. Paid in cash. Full repaint. No insurance claim. The shop owner, an old friend of my father, had logged it as minor parking lot scrape. But the most damning evidence came from Voss Construction's own financial records. I still had limited access to some old bookkeeping files. Large cash withdrawals, exactly matching the body shop invoice, were made 2 days after my crash. My father had signed them personally. Mrs. Delgado gave a sworn affidavit. The tow truck driver provided a statement. Even one of the paramedics agreed to testify about what he saw that night before the story was rewritten. Thomas Reed warned me. It was strong, but we had to be careful. My father had influence. Marcus came from a connected family. One wrong move, and they could bury everything again. So I stayed silent. I attended Claire's engagement party with a smile. I listened to my mother talk about how excited she was to finally have a son in the family. I watched Marcus kiss my sister and laugh with my father like he hadn't shattered my life. Every time they dismissed me, every condescending pat on the shoulder, every "You need to move on, Elena," it only fueled my resolve. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it for the girl who woke up in the hospital, terrified and alone. For the woman who learned to drive with hand controls. For every person who's ever been told their pain is an inconvenience. The week before the rehearsal dinner, Detective Ramirez from the Cold Case Unit called me personally. "We've reopened the investigation," she said. "We have enough to bring them in for questioning. But we need one more thing. We need them to feel safe enough to slip up." That's when I made my final decision. I told her I would still attend the rehearsal dinner. Not as a victim, but as the woman who was finally ready to watch the truth do what I had spent 2 years preparing it to do. By the time the rehearsal dinner approached, I understood my family's true priorities with painful clarity. It was never about me. It was about Voss Construction. My father had spent 35 years building the company from nothing. The new downtown commercial complex project was supposed to be their biggest contract ever, worth millions. A scandal involving his future son-in-law driving drunk and leaving his daughter paralyzed would destroy everything. So they made a choice. They chose the company over my spine. They chose their reputation over my truth. They chose Marcus's future over my recovery. Claire knew. She admitted it once, during a late-night phone call, months earlier, her voice shaky. "Daddy said if this gets out, the whole family loses. I love you, Elena. But I can't lose everything we've built." My mother cried about it in private, but still stood by my father. Sometimes we have to make hard decisions for the greater good, she told me once, as if my ability to walk was just collateral damage. Marcus acted like nothing happened. He even offered to help pay for my medical bills. Hush. Money disguised as brotherly love. I politely declined and kept every message. The more I learned, the more their behavior made sense. The expensive gifts, the sudden warmth toward Marcus, the way they sidelined me at every family event. It was all damage control. They weren't healing as a family. They were managing a liability. Me. And the craziest part? For a while, I almost understood their fear. I grew up watching my father pour everything into that company. I saw how hard he worked. But understanding their fear didn't excuse their betrayal. There's a difference between protecting your family and protecting your image at the cost of one of your own children. I stopped making excuses for them. The day I received the paint analysis report, confirming the match between Marcus's SUV and my wrecked car. That night, I sat in my wheelchair in the dark for a long time, just breathing. Then I whispered to the empty room, "I'm not your secret anymore." The night of the rehearsal dinner, I chose a simple black dress that felt powerful. I did my makeup carefully. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had spent 2 years preparing for this exact moment. I wasn't going there to cause a scene. I was going there to end one. The final days before the rehearsal dinner were some of the hardest. I spent long hours with Thomas Reed, going over every document, every statement, every possible scenario. He prepared me for the worst, that my family might still try to twist the narrative, that influence might be used, that emotions would run high. "You've built an incredibly strong case," he told me. "But the moment they realize you're not bluffing, they may become dangerous. Stay calm. Let the evidence speak." Detective Ramirez also coached me. The plan was simple but delicate. I would attend the dinner as if nothing was wrong. If the opportunity arose naturally, I would plant the seed. The police would be ready nearby. I practiced my breathing. I practiced staying calm under pressure. I visualized the scene over and over, not with anger, but with clarity. Meanwhile, I continued playing the role they expected. I helped Claire pick out the last-minute table centerpieces. I listened to my father boast about the upcoming contract. I even accepted a hug from Marcus when he told me how proud he was of my progress. Every fake smile strengthened my resolve. The night before the dinner, I sat alone in my apartment, reviewing the final file Thomas had prepared. A thick folder containing 2 years of truth. I ran my fingers over the pages and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not happiness, not triumph yet. Just peace. I whispered to myself, "You've done enough. Tomorrow, you don't have to carry this alone anymore." I slept better that night than I had in months. The next evening, as I drove to the vineyard with my hand controls, the sun was setting in beautiful shades of orange and pink. I rolled down the window and let the warm air brush my face. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what was coming. I was ready. When I arrived at the terrace, Claire rushed over to greet me, her eyes bright with wedding excitement. My mother adjusted my shawl with practiced tenderness. My father gave me a nod, the closest thing to approval I'd received in years. Marcus even leaned down and said, "Glad you could make it, sis." I smiled at all of them. Because I knew. In just a few hours, the carefully constructed lie they had built around my broken body was going to shatter in front of everyone they cared about. And I would finally be free. The week leading up to the rehearsal dinner felt like the calm before a storm I had personally summoned. Detective Ramirez called me on Tuesday. "We have warrants ready," she said quietly. "Paint analysis is confirmed. Mrs. Delgado's statement is rock solid. We're prepared to move once we have the right moment. Just stay safe, Elena." I thanked her and hung up, my hands steady on my phone. Thomas Reed reviewed the civil suit documents one last time. We were ready to file the moment things escalated. The goal wasn't just criminal charges. It was full accountability. Medical costs. Lost wages. Pain and suffering. The kind of justice that actually changes lives. I spent the last few days doing normal things that felt anything but normal. I went grocery shopping. I finished a design project for a client. I had lunch with Mrs. Delgado, who held my hand and told me she would be at the dinner as a distant guest on Marcus's side. She looked at me with fierce pride and said, "You're not just fighting for yourself, dear. You're fighting for every person who's ever been silenced." Her words stayed with me. On the morning of the rehearsal, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I stood up, using my braces for a few minutes. Something I could manage on good days, and looked at myself in the full-length mirror. My legs were weak, but my eyes were strong. I spoke to my reflection. You are not broken. You are not crazy. You are not alone. Today, you tell the truth. Then I sat back down in my wheelchair, chose my favorite black dress, did my hair and makeup with care, and drove to the vineyard as the sun began to set. The terrace looked magical. Twinkling lights, beautiful tables, laughter in the air. Claire was glowing. My parents were playing the perfect hosts. Marcus was shaking hands, like he already owned the place. I rolled in quietly and took my place at the family table. No one suspected a thing, but I could feel it. The weight of 2 years of silence, pressing against the truth I carried with me. This was it. The moment I had prepared for. The moment everything would change. The toasts began after dinner. My father stood first, praising the union of two powerful families and the bright future ahead for Voss Construction. Everyone clapped. Then Claire rose, beautiful and radiant, and gave her speech about love and family. Finally, she looked at me. And of course, a special thank you to my sister Elena, who has overcome so much. We're so glad you're here with us tonight, even with all your challenges. A polite but awkward applause followed. Marcus, emboldened by champagne and the spotlight, decided to add his own touch. He walked behind my chair again, placed his hands on the handles, and said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Yeah, Elena's always been a fighter, even if she sometimes fights the wrong battles, right?" That's when I spoke. My voice was calm, clear, and carried across the terrace. Actually, Marcus, the only wrong battle was the one you ran from 2 years ago on Highway 19. The entire terrace went silent. Claire's smile froze. My father's face hardened. My mother's hand flew to her chest. I continued, looking straight at Marcus. You hit my car from behind. You left me there. And my family helped cover it up so it wouldn't affect the business or your wedding. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Marcus's face turned red. That's ridiculous. She's making this up again. She's been obsessed with this fantasy since the accident. I stayed perfectly still in my chair. I have the paint analysis. I have the sworn statements. I have the financial records of the cash payments to repaint your SUV. And I have witnesses. My father stepped forward, voice low and threatening. Elena, stop this right now. You're embarrassing yourself and this family. But I didn't stop. I looked at my sister and said softly, You chose him over me. You chose the lie over your own sister. That's when Marcus snapped. He grabbed the handles of my wheelchair violently and tried to shove me away from the table. The chair tipped. I fell to the stone floor for the second time that night. Pain shot through my body, but I remained calm. Before anyone could react, Mrs. Delgado stood up from her table and called out in a strong voice. I saw it. I saw him hit her car and drive away. I gave my statement 2 years ago. At that exact moment, Detective Ramirez and 3 officers walked onto the terrace. Marcus Hale. Detective Ramirez said clearly, You're under arrest for leaving the scene of an accident causing serious bodily injury, obstruction of justice, and related charges. Chaos erupted. Claire screamed. My father tried to intervene. My mother broke down crying. But I just stayed on the floor for a moment, breathing, until a kind waiter helped me back into my chair. I looked at my family. Really looked at them. As the officers handcuffed Marcus. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt the weight begin to lift. The beautiful rehearsal dinner collapsed in real time. Guests who had been laughing and toasting just minutes earlier now stood in stunned silence. Phones came out. Whispers spread like wildfire. The fairy lights that had looked so romantic now illuminated a scene of complete devastation. My father tried desperately to control the situation. This is a private family matter, he boomed. There's no need for this kind of spectacle. Detective Ramirez didn't even blink. Actually, Mr. Voss, this is very much a public matter now. We have overwhelming evidence of a cover-up involving your company and your future son-in-law. Claire was sobbing, clutching at Marcus as the officers led him away. This can't be happening. Daddy, do something! But my father's influence had limits. The warrants were solid. The evidence was stronger. My mother approached me slowly, tears streaming down her face. She knelt beside my wheelchair, something she hadn't done in 2 years. I was scared, she whispered. I didn't know how to stop it. I'm so sorry, Elena. I looked at her for a long moment. The woman who had chosen comfort over courage. The mother who taught me to be quiet. I know you were scared, I said gently. But I was broken. And you still chose silence. She sobbed harder. Meanwhile, Mrs. Delgado came over and hugged me tightly. You did it, my brave girl. You told the truth. Several guests approached me afterward. Some apologized for believing the family narrative. Others simply touched my shoulder in silent support. The room had completely turned. For 2 years, they had painted me as the difficult, confused, attention-seeking daughter. Now they saw the truth. As the police lights flashed in the parking lot, I sat calmly in my wheelchair, hands in my lap, breathing steadily. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't need to. The evidence had spoken louder than any scream ever could. My father stood alone near the head table, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. The empire he had protected at all costs was already starting to crack. And I finally felt free. The weeks that followed were intense but healing. Marcus took a plea deal. He received 3 years in prison and was ordered to pay substantial restitution. The criminal case against my father for his role in the cover-up is still ongoing. But Voss Construction has already lost the major downtown contract. Several key clients pulled out once the story made local news. Claire postponed the wedding indefinitely. Last I heard, she moved to another city. We haven't spoken. My mother comes to visit sometimes. Our conversations are careful and short. She is trying, in her own limited way, to make amends. I allow it on my terms now. My father? I haven't seen him since that night. He chose the company over me for the last time. The civil suit settled quietly for an amount that ensures I will never have to worry about medical care, home modifications, or accessible transportation again. I used part of it to start my own full-time design studio. Something I had dreamed of before the crash. I still use a wheelchair for longer distances, but I've grown stronger. I've adapted. More importantly, I've forgiven myself for trusting the wrong people for so long. Mrs. Delgado and I have become close friends. We have lunch together every other week. She tells me stories about her late husband and reminds me that courage always matters. The most beautiful part? I no longer carry the weight of their lies. I sleep through the night now. I laugh more freely. I create beautiful work for clients who respect me. I've even started dating again. Slowly, carefully, with someone who sees me as whole. Justice didn't come with fireworks or dramatic shouting matches. It came quietly, steadily, through patience and truth. And it feels better than I ever imagined. Today, I sit in my apartment, the one I arranged with my own hands and my own choices. And I finally feel at peace. I still have moments where the old pain surfaces. Some mornings my back aches, and memories of that crash come rushing back. But now I know how to hold those memories without letting them hold me. I've learned the difference between being wanted and being valued. My family wanted a version of me that was convenient. I've become a woman who values herself completely, wheelchair and all. I run my design studio successfully. I help other small businesses tell their stories through beautiful branding. And, sometimes, late at night, I write. Not for revenge, but for release. If you're watching this right now, and you're carrying a truth your own family refuses to see, I want you to hear me clearly. Your pain is real. Your memory is valid. You do not need their permission to heal. Write it down. Keep the records. Protect your peace like the precious thing it is. The quiet ones don't stay quiet forever. And when we finally speak our truth, the world has no choice but to listen. I'm Elena Voss. I survived betrayal, gaslighting, and a broken body. And I didn't just survive. I became someone I'm truly proud of. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. If it touched you, if it gave you strength, please type truth in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear they're not alone. And remember, Your story is still being written. You have the power to write the next chapter. The honest one.